Aggregate turnover for composition scheme. Friends, in composition scheme, aggregate turnover is an area where I see that students are generally confused. For composition scheme, the eligibility criteria is that in the preceding financial year, you have to see the aggregate turnover and it should not exceed 1.5 crores, 75 lakh for few states and 50 lakhs for keeping in mind the service providers. So this is the eligibility criteria. It says we have to see the aggregate turnover. Now, if we check the definition of aggregate turnover, it says include all types of outward supplies, whether taxable, whether exempt or nil rated or wholly exempt or non-taxable supply, exports, interstates. So, if you observe very carefully, the aggregate turnover definition says all types of outward supply. Now, confusion arises because as far as composition scheme is concerned, there are two types of outward supply which are specifically not allowed actually. And those two types of outward supplies are non-taxable supply, which is alcoholic liquor for human consumption or petrol, diesel, etc. And also, composition dealer is not allowed to engage himself in interstate outward supply. So, on one hand, in the eligibility criteria, it says see aggregate turnover. Whereas on the other hand, it says composition dealer is not eligible, or you can say is not allowed to engage into two types of interstate supplies and in the non-taxable supplies. So the confusing area is between eligibility and conditions, because in eligibility the term uses aggregate turnover, whereas in conditions they are specifically saying no interstate and exports are also like interstate, therefore no exports and no non-taxable supply. So students are generally confused that if a composition dealer is not eligible for interstate supply, if he is not eligible to engage into exports, if he is not eligible, or you can say not allowed to engage into non-taxable supply, then why is the definition of aggregate turnover including those things? If a person is not allowed to engage into non-taxable supply, then why is the definition says include non-taxable supply? If is not allowed to engage into exports, then why is the definition that says include exports? If is not allowed to engage into interstate supply, then why does the definition of aggregate turnover says include interstate supply? So basically this is the area of confusion. So friends, I will like to explain you, I will give you some clarity about the same thing. First of all, keep your concepts very clear about this definition of aggregate turnover. Friends, this definition of aggregate turnover is not meant, I repeat, is not meant only for composition scheme. Friends, this is a common definition which the government is using for registration purposes, for ITC related purposes, for composition scheme purposes, for returns, for refunds, etc. So friends, the very first thing which you have to understand to bring clarity is that this definition is not meant only to be used in composition scheme. This is a common definition which the government has prepared, or you can say government has framed, which you have to use at various places. So this definition is not meant only keeping in your mind the composition scheme. I like to explain you in detail. Say for example, friends, if you go to some wedding and in the lunch section or the dinner section, you find there is vegetarian food available, non-vegetarian food available, cold drinks available, ice creams available. Now a diabetic patient has been advised by his doctor that he is not supposed to eat ice creams. Now when he goes to this lunch or dinner section, obviously he will not consume ice creams. But if he wants to consume other things, he can. Similarly, say for example, a person who is only a vegetarian person and he goes into this section, then he will consume only the vegetarian food. But obviously, everything will be there at the same place. Vegetarian food will be there in one side, non-vegetarian food will be there in one side, cold drinks would be there, ice creams would be there. So everything is available. But as per your requirement, you have to consume. If you consume only veg, you see only vegetarian food. If you want to have only non-veg, you can go for only non-veg food. So friends, everything is arranged at one place. A common place is arranged where every type of food is available. Then as per your requirement, you are required to consume. So similarly friends, in aggregate turnover also, government has made a common definition for various purposes. But for composition scheme, if they are specifically mentioning that you are not allowed to engage into interstate or exports and non-taxable supply, then it means even though the definition of aggregate turnover says non-taxable supply, exports and interstate supply, but for a composition dealer, he has to ignore those supplies. So if I want to conclude, then for a composition dealer in aggregate turnover, there will be taxable supply, exempt supply, nil rated and wholly exempt. Only these types of supplies will be there in the definition of aggregate turnover as far as composition dealer is concerned. Because friends, if he engages himself into non-taxable supply, composition scheme will be withdrawn immediately. Same is with exports, same is with interstate supply. So even though the definition says aggregate turnover, but for the purpose of eligibility, only if these types of supplies are there, which is taxable, and in exempt there are two. Oh, see, nil rated, which I have given in green pen, whole exempt and non-taxable supply. These three are exempt supplies. But since a composition dealer is not allowed to engage himself into non-taxable supply, only nil rated supply and wholly exempt supply will come in the aggregate turnover. Now say for example, in examination, you are asked that a person was engaged into exports, is he eligible for composition scheme? No. Non-taxable supply? No. Interstate supply? No. So only if he is engaged in taxable supply, and in exempt supply, either nil rated or wholly exempt, that is allowed. So either you will not be eligible for composition scheme if you engage into these three, or if you have already opted for the composition scheme and if you in the current year you engage into this supplies, then your composition scheme will be withdrawn. So even though the definition of aggregate turnover says include this, that, non-taxable, exports, interstate, but for your composition scheme, a person will include only taxable supply, nil rated and wholly exempt, because if he engages into any other things, either his composition scheme will be withdrawn or he will not be eligible for the composition scheme.